Welcome everyone. Parsha de Shavua. This week we're learning Parsha Yitro and the Ten Commandments. Brought to you live streamed and then archived on Be There Israel and the Or Chadash website and blog and YouTube station. Please tell your friends. Okay, so we'll start at the beginning of Parsha Yitro. And I want to mention at this point, we'll call it a free plug, I think I have permission, is for those people who are following the class on a somewhat weekly basis. So some weeks I use the material in my book, Orchard of Delights. So I always will add to it. Some weeks I don't use it at all. This week, I'm using it almost extensively, but in a completely different combination than what appears in the book. So for all of you who have the book, and this is the free plug, if you don't have the book, Orchard of Delights. Yeah, right. If you like this class, you should really get the book. You can get it online. So for those of you who have the book, you'll see that a lot of the material I'm giving over is in the book, but it's with a completely different point to it. I'm kind of like shuffling the cards. So we're going to start with the first Rashi on the Parsha. The entire Parsha is really made up of two incidences. Is Yitro, the father-in-law of Moshe, meets Bnei Yisrael as they come out of Egypt, and he brings his daughter Zipporah, Moshe's wife, and Moshe's two children. And Yitro gives him advice as to how to judge the people. And the Torah actually spends a substantial amount of time on it. And then it goes right into what's called the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai. There's really only two incidences in the Parsha. We're going to concentrate on the Ten Commandments tonight. But we're going to do it in like a little different of a way, because we're going to just take the first Rashi in the Parsha, which seems to have nothing to do with the Ten Commandments, and we're going to see how actually it is connected. So what is it? How does the Parsha begin? Vayishma Yitro Kohen Midian Choten Moshe et kol asher asa Elokim leMoshe uleYisrael amo ki hotzi Hashem et Yisrael miMitzrayim. And Yitro heard, and Yitro, the priest of Midian, heard. Now, Hebrew you have to translate differently. Pardon me. Yitro, the priest of Midian, the father-in-law of Moshe, heard all that God had done to Moshe and Israel, his people, when God brought Israel out of Egypt. So the first thing that Rashi asks is, what did he hear? It says, Vayishma Yitro et kol asher asa Elokim, everything that God had done. Okay, so we would think it would for sure mention the 10 plagues. I mean, like, if it's everything that God had done. But Rashi asks the question. He says, Ma shemua shemav uba, what did he hear that caused him to come? Apparently he heard all about them going out of Egypt. So Rashi says, Kriyat Yamsuf u'milchemet Amalek. He says he heard about the splitting, well, it doesn't even say, he just heard about, the splitting of the Red Sea and the war with Amalek. And it doesn't mention the 10 plagues at all. So there's a lot of commentary why these two things are mentioned. And this is something that we're not going to go into, but there is a disagreement whether this Parsha here happens before the giving of the Torah or after the giving of the Torah. And that's why Rashi's commentary is significant, because we would think, we could kind of tell where Rashi is holding, because we would think that if Rashi held that Yitro came after the giving of the Torah, then why didn't he hear about the giving of the Torah? Rashi doesn't mention that. So that leads us to believe that Rashi feels that he came before. But I'm just mentioning this as an aside, because I was learning something else about these two things, the splitting of the sea and the war with Amalek. And then I remembered, wow, that's the first thing that Rashi says. That's what Yitro heard. So basically, I'm going to try to give over this whole Torah that I prepared. And only in the end, actually, are we going to plug it back into this Rashi to try to understand Rashi's question. What did he hear that caused him to come? According to tradition, Yitro is like the convert. He's the paradigm of the convert. So much so that he has the merit that the giving of the Ten Commandments is in his Parsha.
Here not yet.
What?
Here not yet. Here he is not yet a convert.
Yeah. But what Rashi is saying, what aroused him, what inspired him to want to come and join the Jewish people? That's really what it means. Yitro heard. Here, this is like heard is like Shema Yisrael. Not just listen, but understand Israel. That's what Shema means here, is understand Israel. So Yitro understood something from the splitting of the sea and the war with Amalek. But only at the end are we going to plug back almost an independent Torah. The Torah I'm going to give over now is, in a sense, independent of this. But I just found it very intriguing that it fits perfectly in here. So we're going to jump to the very beginning of the account of the receiving of the Torah. It's on page 400 in the Art Scroll, the 19th chapter, the first verse. So now begins the account of receiving the Torah. B'chodesh hashlishi, letzet b'nei Yisrael me'eretz Mitzrayim, b'yom hazeh ba'u midbar Sinai. So it says that it was in the third month, and what's implied here is on the first day of the third month, from their coming out of Egypt. On this day, they came to the desert of Sinai. And then it says, V'yisu mirifidim v'yavo'u midbar Sinai. And they traveled from Refidim. That's where they fought Amalek. And they came to the desert of Sinai. V'yachanu b'midbar. And they camped in the midbar. Now notice that the word v'yachanu is in the plural. They camped as it should be. They camped in the midbar. But then it says, Vayichan Sham Yisrael neged Ahar. And then it says, and Israel camped across from the mountain. But here, the word for camped is in the singular. So this is an obvious, like red lights are going off. Like why? Just a few words apart. First it's plural, and then it's singular. So this is one of the most well-known Rashis in the whole Torah, is commenting on this. So if you look in the Rashi, he says, a very famous statement. Ki'ish echad b'leiv echad. Aval shar kol hachaniyot b'tarumot u'b'machloket. He says, why does it say they camped in the singular? Because they were like one person with one heart. But then he says, but all the rest of the encampments in the desert were full of problems and disagreements. So in other words, there was something unique happening here. There was some kind of a unity of purpose, so much so that the Torah takes the word vayachanu, and they camped, and writes it in the singular. And this expression from Rashi is quoted endlessly as the ultimate ideal for the Jewish people, and let's say ultimately the world. Ki'ish echad b'leiv echad, like one person with one heart. So in my book, I asked the question, well, how did they get to this level? You know, almost what Rashi asks about Yitro. He says, what did Yitro hear? So this question is not the same, it's similar. It's like, what happened that Israel came to the mountain of Sinai like one person with one heart? There's no outward explanation of how that happened. Rashi just says that's the way it was. And most people leave the Rashi at that. They came unified. But the question is, how? So the way I answered it is, and now you'll see why I jumped on this first Rashi, is there are two things that happened that prepared them to be in this headspace. The first one was Kriyat Yam Suf. Because after they crossed the Yam, so we're told, this is just last week's Parsha, we're told that all of Israel sang. And the Midrash says that what the simplest handmaiden saw at the sea was greater than what Ezekiel saw in his vision of the chariot, which is perhaps the most mystical section of the entire Tanakh, which we read as the Haftorah on the first day of Shavuos. Well, in Israel, there is only one day. So obviously, what happened at Kriyat Yam Suf is like everyone experienced a prophetic experience greater than Yechezkel, greater than Ezekiel. So then the question is, how did that happen? Through the singing. Right? Through the experience of the singing, they became Ki'ish echad b'leiv echad. And that's why it's one of the 10 archetypal songs sung throughout history. And why the Midrash says this astounding thing, that everyone had visions greater than what's called Ma'aseh Merkavah, greater than the chariot. But what was the vehicle? What was the chariot? The music, the singing. And I think everyone can understand that. Anyone who has experienced music in a deep way, especially with other people. And it could be in a Beit Knesset, it could be in tefillah, could have been around a campfire, it could have been at a concert, but where the music just unifies the consciousness of everyone there. Everyone's plugged into the music. Mentally plugged into the music. And it creates a feeling of Ki'ish echad b'leiv echad. So remember, this is just to answer, how did we get to camp at Sinai as one person with one heart? So the first thing is this experience at the sea. What is the second one? The war with Amalek. How did they become one through warfare? So this is something that anyone who's been in Israel during any of the wars, or chas v'shalom, after a terrorist attack, or some kind of national tragedy, knows how the day before, people could have been like ready to fist fights in the Knesset, but as soon as war breaks out, chas v'shalom, like all the differences just fade away, and everyone unites in a single purpose. Israel has gone through this. Like, I don't know if there's any other country that has had so many wars. I mean, there were, like in Europe, there was the 100-Year War, but these are different wars. Like you finish a war, and then like 2 or 3 or 4 years later, there's another war. So in the war with Amalek, to defeat Amalek, the people had to be united. They had to have been of one mind, of one purpose. So both of these incidences lead up to them coming to the desert of Sinai on the 1st of Sivan, and they came like one person with one heart. So it's a very deep way to understand what is this well-known Rashi, which he doesn't flesh out for us. We have to like think of the implications ourselves as to how they reach that. So I'm actually going to do a little bit differently. I was going to save the whole thing of Yitro to the end, but I'm going to plug him in right now. So now we can understand, what did Yitro hear? He heard about these two same things. So if we look at the Rashi very superficially, it's like, oh, there was a miracle at the Yam, and they defeated this, formidable enemy, Amalek. I think I want to be part of them. But must have been more than that. What Yitro heard, meaning what he understood, is he heard or plugged in to this sense of unity that he heard they reached at the crossing of the sea and the war with Amalek. And that is what like turned him on. Like, this I want to be part of. I want to be part of this.
Could it also be that he related to the Kriyat Yamsuf on the level of rebirth, and that he was in some sense looking for that in himself, and that also?
Okay, so what we do now is I have to repeat the question, because those people who are watching can't hear the question. So we have a question that maybe in addition to what I said, perhaps Yitro was connecting to the theme of rebirth that going through the Yam represents. And the answer would be absolutely. Definitely would be part of it. We've talked many, many times that the parable of coming out of Egypt is the 10 plagues are the birth pangs. The splitting of the water is when a woman's waters break in preparation to give birth. The going through the sea is the baby going through the birth canal. Coming to the other side is the baby coming out into the world. So we could say, yes, Yitro, that might have also been a factor and what he heard, what he understood, that this is a newborn people, and I want to be a part of it. But now let's take this idea, and we have to run with it. The Art Scroll and the Slow Number Rebbe, they both say a very similar thing when discussing the various 10 archetypal songs. And they want to understand, what does it mean that a song becomes one of the 10 archetypal songs? Like, what are the ingredients? What are the stipulations to, there have been billions of songs sung. There's 150 psalms, and only one of them was included in one of these songs. So we see that in almost every case, the songs that are chosen are songs that represent a transition and either by an individual or all of Israel, a unified sense of purpose, which is like a symphony. Let's say a symphony has 100 instruments. If anyone's heard a symphony tune up, right? It sounds like cacophony. It's like, no one's playing together. Everyone's just tuning up their instruments. So it doesn't sound like music at all. But then when they, launch into the symphony, then it all comes together. So that's the idea of an archetypal song. An archetypal song is when national purpose comes together, or an individual's purpose comes together. Let's say for Hannah sang when she gave birth to Shmuel, and her song was prophecy, but it's because she made the transition from being childless to having a child. And we know the story of Hannah. That was like the purpose of her whole life. So when she reached the fulfillment of the purpose of her life, then she could sing. And when they crossed the sea, so this represented the final leaving of Egypt. That was it. Only when they got to the other side and they realized the miracle, and they realized, we're really out now. There's no turning back, and they're not going to come after us. So it was the culmination of the transition and the culmination of the fulfillment of purpose. So we see that in both the singing of the song at the sea and fighting the war of Amalek, what brought them to this state of Ka'ish Echad B'Lev Echad, first we said it was the music, and then we said it was the danger. But if you go one step deeper, they both have to do with purpose. Because each one hooked them in to a sense of mission, of purpose, of something so much greater than themselves. And so we want to explore that in relationship to the Ten Commandments now. So, first of all, I can't go into as much detail as I would like because of time restraints, but there are many, many different midrashim and hints to the connection between the creation of the world and the giving of the Torah. Many, many different connections. The most obvious is there are 10 expressions through which God created the world, 10 mamarot, and God said, and God said, and God said 10 times. And the fact that there are 10, in Hebrew, they're not called really the 10 Commandments. They're the Aseret HaDibrot. They're really sayings. So that connects, because both of them, creation and the giving the Torah, was through speech. And of course, we've discussed many, many times the other links of 10, the 10 tests of Avram, the 10 plagues, and how they're all connected, the 10 sphirot. They're all connected. Yes, that we'll get to. So we want to make a very, very strong connection between the giving the Torah and the creation of the world. And the Rashi that puts it together better than any of them is back in Bereshit at the first Shabbat on the words Yom HaShishi, which we include in Kiddush. That's how we begin Kiddush. Yom HaShishi, Vayachulu Hashemayim V'aretz V'kol Tzva'am. And it was at Vayhi Erev, Vayhi Voker, Yom HaShishi. It was evening and it was morning, the sixth day. So Rashi asks, wait a minute, it doesn't say Vayhi Erev, Vayhi Boker, Yom HaSheni. It was evening, it was morning, the sixth day, the second day. Ha-shlishi, ha-revi'i, ha-chamishi. Doesn't say, have the letter Hey before each of the days, second, third, fourth, fifth, but the sixth it does. It says Yom Ha-shishi, which we can interpret as the sixth day with a big capital T. The sixth day. So Rashi says, why is this? So he says, because it alludes to another sixth day. The 6th of Sivan, on which the Torah was given. And then Rashi says an amazing thing. He says, it was as if all of creation was hanging in the balance, or al tanai. It was on condition that Israel would receive the Torah at Sinai on the 6th of Sivan. So Rashi connects that the whole creation was on condition that Israel would receive the Torah in Sinai. This connects to the very first Rashi. It's not the very first Rashi, but on the first verse of Rashi. Rashi says, Bereshit. He says, don't read it in the beginning. Read it bishvil, for the sake of the bet of Bereshit. Bereshit means beginning or first. Ba means in. The Rashi says, don't read it in. Read the ba like bishvil, for the sake of Torah, which is called the first of my ways, and for the sake of Israel, which is called the first of my produce. Again, Rashi connects Torah and Israel. And then in Yom HaShishi, he connects the creation of the world, which is for Torah, on condition that Israel receives it on the 6th of Sivan. So Rashi is going like this, between creation and the Ten Commandments. I learned from Rabbi Ginsburg that the sentence preceding the Ten Commandments, Vayidaber Elokim et kol ha'devarim ha'ela le'mor, is 7 words and 28 letters, which is the exact same construct as Reshit bara Elokim et Shemaim et ha'aretz. 7 words and 28 letters. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The 7 words and 28 letters. And the introductory sentence to the Ten Commandments is the same construct. And they're both Elokim. Reshit bara Elokim and Vayidaber Elokim. So the Mamarot is Vayomer Elokim 10 times. And here it's Vayidaber Elokim. So there's this connection between creation and the giving of the Ten Commandments. On the verse that we read, it was on the third month, on the first day, when Bnei Yisrael came to the desert of Sinai. It says, B'yom hazeh, on this day. So Rashi says, grammatically, it should have said in Hebrew, on that day. On this day doesn't really work grammatically so good. It should be on that day. So he says, so why does it say on this day? To teach you that Torah should be as new to you today as if it was given today. By Yom Hazeh, the Torah is given today. It wasn't a one-time occurrence. And what do we say about the creation? The same thing. Creation was not a one-time occurrence. It happens at every second. And as we've learned many times, at every split second. So here's another deep connection between the giving of the Torah, which Rashi says should be new to you every day, as if it's given today, and creation, which is happening every day. He renews the works of creation every day. So now we see this idea of purpose is running through everything we've said tonight. They're singing at Yam Suf because they finally can see the whole picture now. They can finally see like everything they've been through. And when Moshe first stood at Sinai, when was that? At the burning bush. And when Moshe was like, I don't know, I'm not sure. So God says, I'll give you a sign. When you come out of Egypt, you'll return to this place and serve me on this mountain. So that's the connection between the word sneh, hasneh, equals Sinai. But it's spelled out. It's not even a hint. God says that the sign to you is you'll return to this very place and serve me on the mountain. So when they came out of Egypt, that's why the day after Pesach, we begin counting Omer. There's an agricultural reason for it, but in this context, the reason is that as soon as we come out of Egypt, we start counting towards Sinai.
Some say the first Shabbat.
But that wasn't accepted.
No?
No, that was a huge. Someone asked. They heard it was the first Shabbat after Pesach. That was the Sadducees. The Tzaddukim read the Torah literally, and because it says on the day after the Shabbat you shall start counting. But the sages have the tradition that Shabbat here means the rest day of Pesach. But the idea here is freedom in a Jewish sense means receiving Torah, living by Torah. That's what's called freedom. So that's why we immediately start counting towards the receiving of the Torah, to tell us we're not just going out of Egypt because we were oppressed and it was bad and we were slaves. It's true. It's true. But we're going towards something. And what we're going towards is the purpose. Now this is, if you picked up on this, this is the same scenario as God saying, as Rashi explaining, that God says that creation is on condition that on the 6th day of Sivan, the Jewish people will receive the Torah. So this is God saying to the Jewish people, I'm bringing you out of Egypt in order to give you the Torah. It's not that we go out of Egypt, and then we receive the Torah. They're intrinsically linked together. You can't separate them. So we see again purpose here. Purpose is linking all of these ideas. Now, for those who are here and those who are watching online, so 2 weeks ago in Parshat Bo, we dedicated the whole class, and everyone should know all of these classes are archived and you can go back. The whole class was about how to become a master of time. Why? Is because the first mitzvah given to the Jewish people in preparation for leaving Egypt was Achodesh Hazeh Lechem. This month to you is the first of all of the months. And we learned that along with that, they received the whole wisdom of the Jewish calendar and how to become a master of time. And in short, we learned that that was the first the first condition of freedom, is because a slave has no control over their time. They're not a master of their time. They have to do what they're told when they're told. So the first thing on the way to freedom is to take ownership of time. So we spent a whole class on this. We're not going to go back, but as part of that, we delved into scientific ideas about time, and then we connected them to Kabbalistic explanations of time. And in that explanation, we mentioned the idea of what's called the space-time continuum, how space and time are intrinsically connected together. And then we mentioned that in Kabbalistic thought, there's a fifth dimension, which is called nefesh, which is consciousness. And we quoted from the Sefer Yetzirah, which calls these dimensions Olam, Shana, and Nefesh. Olam meaning world, meaning 3 dimensions of space. Shana, which means year or time, which is the 4th dimension. And then a 5th dimension called Nefesh, consciousness. And we explained that right now the cutting edge of science is exploring the 5th dimension, because quantum physics is absolutely fascinated and captivated now by the role of consciousness in determining reality. This is like probably the most important area in quantum physics right now. And then we quoted from this week's Parsha. That's why I'm saying all of this. So if you go to page 404 in your art scroll, it's chapter 19. Pasuk 18. Yud Chet. So it says, now, we're in the midst of the description of what's happening on the very day that the Torah is being given, and the mountain is shaking, and there's sounds in heaven, and the sound of the shofar. And then it says, V'har Sinai ashan kulo. And the mountain of Sinai was full of smoke. Mipnei asher yerad alav Hashem be'esh. Because God had descended upon the mountain in fire. So the question is, why does the Torah have to tell us that the mountain was full of smoke? Like, what do we learn from it? So if you look at the word ashan, so these are the first letters of the 5 dimensions mentioned in the Sefer Yetzirah. Ayin is olam, shin is shana, and nun is nefesh. World, soul, world, space, time, and consciousness. And the reason the Torah tells us this is that the experience at Sinai, we quoted the Midrash that said that the simplest handmaiden at the sea saw visions greater than Ezekiel the prophet. What we're told about Mount Sinai is that the 7 heavens opened up. The 7 heavens opened up. All of the dimensions merged together, time, space, and consciousness. And Rashi says that on a different verse, after the Torah is given, it says that the people saw the sounds of the shofar. So Rashi brings the Midrash. What does it mean they saw the sounds of the shofar? So Rashi says they saw what usually could only be heard. Something that did not occur in any other place. In other words, not only the dimensions merged, but our senses merged. Synesthesia. In modern science, there are people who can experience a crossing of senses, and they can see sounds, and they can hear colors, and the senses cross. I mean, it's a rarity, but here we're being told the entire people experience this simultaneously. Now, the reason why I wanted to put this in here is because we're talking about purpose. And 2 weeks ago, when we were talking about time, so we were talking scientifically about time, and what does it mean that time and space are a continuum and are unified? And what does it mean that when matter approaches the speed of light, all time stops? And we began to compare this to a human being's experience of time. How for one person, 3 months can fly by. That's the expression. The time flew by. And for another person, 5 minutes can seem like forever. So if you look at objectively, nothing is changing about time. In a time-space continuum, nothing is different about either of these experiences. What changes it, though? Nefesh, consciousness. Consciousness determines how we experience time. And from there, we made the leap of how you can become a master of time by taking control of time, of not being a slave to time, but controlling time. So I'm bringing this again here for a very specific purpose. Because anytime you learn something, you have to ask, well, what does this mean to me? So here, we've just spent a lot of time connecting the creation of the world and the giving of the Torah. There's one midrash I didn't say, is that God says to the Jewish people, if you accept the Torah today, good. And if not, I'll return the world to chaos and void. So there are all of these not so subtle hints that the creation depends on our receiving the Torah. And why is that? What does that tell us? Why is that important that we make this connection between creation and the giving of the Ten Commandments? Is because through Torah and mitzvot, we plug into the purpose of creation. That in the mind of an evolutionist, there is no intrinsic purpose to the world. There is no intrinsic purpose, and there's no intrinsic true objective morals and ethics either. A society can be very moral, or it could be very immoral. But there's nothing intrinsic that it has to be either way. It depends on what a culture decides to do. And how did a human being become a human being? Through trillions of random mutations and chance occurrences. And we can give purpose to our lives, but it's not intrinsic. There's nothing moving creation in any particular direction. And that, of course, is not a Torah viewpoint. And that's why this midrash, this explanation of Rashi of Yom HaShishi is so important, because what it's saying is that, like the Rambam says in Hilchot Tshuva that everyone should see the world at every moment as if the scales are perfectly even. And my next act will tilt the scales in either direction. In other words, laying the most awesome responsibility at each person's shoulder. It's as if you determine which way the entire world is going to go. Another statement by the sages, which also, at first glance, is like outrageous. Every person should see it as if the whole world is created for them. So you say, wow, that's pretty egotistical. Like, why would the Torah want us to think that? And the answer is not to be an ego trip. But if God created the whole world for me, whoa, what responsibility I have to make it a good world. Like, it's almost the opposite of egotism. It's just because I'm carrying the whole world on my shoulders. I have to be so good. Because if I'm not, the whole world is like, what did God create it for if I'm going to do terrible things?
Well, we were also created after the fly, for example.
I'm sorry?
We were also created after the fly.
Meaning?
Meaning that counterbalances that the whole world was just created for us. We were created last.
Right. The comment is that since we were created last, so we're what's called the crown of creation. But what does David HaMelech say? David HaMelech says, I'm worse than a worm. How do they explain that? Explain it. A worm does exactly what a worm was made to do. A dog does exactly what a dog is supposed to do. A lion, a tree, a stone, everything does exactly what it's supposed to do. Only man has the ability and the free choice to decide not to do what it was created for, not to fulfill its potential, not to be in tune with its mission. So David Melech says, I'm worse than a worm. A worm's like perfectly in tune with God's will. Okay, so let's put this all together, because, as I say, everything that we learn has to become personally relevant to us. So what we were trying to do tonight was to tie together creation and the giving of the Ten Commandments, and also how did we come to Mount Sinai with such a sense of purpose that it was Ke'ish echad b'leiv echad, like one person with one heart. And that connects to what Yitro heard. So we tried to take one word and let it be the thread through the whole thing. So what it means to us is that, number one, by connecting the Ten Commandments, and one beautiful gem here is that the Ten Commandments have 620 letters, which equals Keter, crown. And this is where we get the expression Keter Torah, the crown of Torah. And we're told that the Ten Commandments encapsulate the entire Torah. And in fact, there have been attempts to take every single letter of the Ten Commandments and tell us which of the mitzvot that letter is. But then you'll ask, but there's only 613 mitzvot, and there's 620 letters. So there's two explanations. The Balaturim says it's the 613 mitzvot and the 7 mitzvot b'nei Noach, and the 7 universal commandments of the children of Noach. And the other version is it's the 7 mitzvot from the rabbis that they gave the weight of a Torah commandment. So either version is 613 and 7 equals 620. And so the idea of receiving the Ten Commandments is like receiving the entire Torah. And we made the point that we're supposed to see Torah as if it's new, and creation is new. So the relevance for us is, if we see it that way, remember the example, time could either fly or drag. And that's all up here. So the Torah can be old for us, or it could be new for us. Every time we go to daven, we have a challenge. It's pretty much the same words every day. Shabbos is pretty much the same words. Each holiday is pretty much the same words. Our challenge on a daily level is it going to be old to us, or is it going to be new to us? And the only one who can answer that is ourselves. It could be the same words, or like they say in the Talmud, there's no comparison between learning something for the 101st time than the 100th time. You'd say, are you sure? And the answer is Yes, for sure. You can learn, if let's say you're born religious, and so you start learning Chumash at age, 3 or 4, and Bezrat Hashem, you live to 120. So you've gone through Bereshit 100, like almost 120 times. Right? That's just at the time of Bereshit. And of course you're going to find something new 120th time. Of course you are. And the second thing is, I'm not going to overemphasize this, is that Torah gives us a sense of purpose because God created the world with purpose. That's the connection. That Torah connects us to the purpose for which God created the world. And the last point that we want to make is the role of our own consciousness in making our lives purposeful, in making our lives moral and ethical, in becoming a master of time, and in connecting to constant renewal and rejuvenation. So we should all have the bracha that no matter how many times we've learned something, each time we see something new. Every time we daven, the words like pop out of the page like, I never saw that before. For me, that's one of my favorite things. Favorite things is to learn something that is like, oh my gosh, I've been saying this for like 30 years. I never saw that. Like, I get so excited. It's like, it's been there. How come I didn't see that? Because the Torah is infinite. We should just have the level of consciousness to be able to plug in. Chaim l'chaim.